Hi, I'm Barbara Miles. I was a Ruby, and we do have some Rubies here today. And I'm related to the Jones sisters, and this is my niece, Annie Werner, and I'm going to let her start.
Well, I'm Annie Boteler now.
Oh, that's true.
That's right. That's right. Connection with Warner that we needed, right?
Yes, right. So what I did was I looked through old newspaper articles and some of the family records. Aunt Barbara's cousin Jane has written a very extensive history of the Jones family, which was very helpful. So I took a look at that and got some information as well. And I've just put together a little bit about these extraordinary women. So they signed their paintings and their photos the Trois Sœurs to begin with, the three sisters. And later they changed it to Jones sisters, and I don't know when that was. We don't have very many with the Trois Sœurs, so I'm not sure.
One of them got married, didn't
No, they never married.
I thought the third.
No. So originally their family, the Jones family, lived in Kent County. And they moved here when the Jones sisters' father, Nicholas, and that's his picture there, when he was a young man, they moved to Howard County. They bought a 227-acre farm called Annandale. And his father, Nicholas's father, was farming that. And Nicholas and one of his brothers, James, stayed on the farm and farmed it even after their father had passed away. Nicholas married Julia Webb and in 1880, and then they had three daughters. And let's see, Frances, the oldest, was born in 1881, and Ida was born in 1882, and Elsie, we know she was born on January 3rd, but according to the family Bible, we can't see the date of the actual year, so we need to do some more research and find out, exactly when she was born. But that they had the three daughters, and they must have been fairly prosperous on their farm in Annandale, because the girls apparently had their own schoolhouse on the property and their own governess who was teaching them. So they had some kind of prosperity, and they were raised there for, I'm assuming, most of their childhood. Eventually they moved into Sykesville, where they had some properties that they rented out. You talked about that.
7256.
Aunt Barbara, actually, her first years were spent in a property that her parents rented from them as well. Now, the Jones sisters, if you've seen their pictures, and I'm assuming most of you who are here have, their pictures are fantastic. But it begins with the photography. The photograph is the beginning piece of their art form, their art production. And those were taken by Elsie, the youngest. Apparently, she had an interest in photography and history from, even childhood. She recalled a time when someone gave her a photograph of the old Sykesville train station, the tracks, the river, and in the back was the Sykes Hotel. And it was actually a tintype, so it was an old picture. And this picture, when she was given it in the early 1900s, was already old. That hotel had been destroyed in 1868. Yes. So, yes, thank you. 1868. Check my notes. Yes. 1868. So that when she received that picture in the early 1900s, it was already old. And it developed this love of history along with photography. And so she bought her first Voigtlander camera, I don't know if that's the original one, in the 30s. And for $125.
Wow.
Yeah. and started taking pictures. And she took pictures of old pumps, old houses, the gardens, historic places, bridges. And she also used these photographs as an avenue to talk about the history of these places. So she would give lectures and talks, and she would use her photographs. And I think Aunt Barbara's going to talk a little bit more about this, but apparently she had a ghost story for every house that she talked about. So if the audience started to get a little bit, sleepy or bored, she could throw that in and reel them back in. But in an interview that was conducted with her when she was older, she described what she did as combining history and photography. So things that she was interested in, this was her way of exploring those and sharing those with people. Now, her sister Ida, who was the middle child, she graduated in 1916 from the Maryland Institute. I think it was at that point in time called the Maryland Institute for Mechanical Arts or something like that. It became the Maryland Institute of Art after she graduated. So it was an art school in Baltimore that had been established in the mid-1800s. So it had a good record by the time she was there. And so she was an artist, and she's the one who started taking these black and white photographs and applying just a thin layer of oil paint so that they looked colored, but also maintained still the crisp detail that, you know, the black and white photo provided. So, you know, she was that artistic part with the colors and the art, and probably some of the staging of the still life photos. I'm not really sure. Their sister Fanny, the oldest, she was the one who cooked and cleaned and drove the car apparently when they explored around the places. That's interesting. I'm not going to talk to you about that. But the thing that I find the most compelling about their story is they didn't just give credit to Elsie for the photographs. They didn't just give credit to Fanny for the coloring. They gave credit to all three of them. And in that interview, when she was older, Elsie said, to speak of one is to speak of all, and credit for one is credit for all. And so they really were a unit in the way that they seemed to present themselves. And I find that really compelling. In their time period, in our time period, I think that's timeless. This bond of sisters and how they, you know, they wanted to be a group together. So I think that's pretty interesting. Now, one of the things that I really liked when in an interview with Elsie, she talked about this picture, and there's a couple of this particular image from different places, but the Huskers is what she calls it. You know, a really quintessential picture of rural Maryland gathering the corn together. And she described this picture, she said it was so cold the day she took this picture that she had to go home and warm her hands before she could close her camera. And I think that speaks a lot to her dedication to her art, and then as well, I'm sure, the sisters together. They were really dedicated to this. So in their older years, they didn't want to give up what they were doing. So in the 1950s, they opened Sunny Home Studio in Sykesville, and that's where they sold not just these photos, but also they made postcards, note cards out of this. They sold their cut work, which, you know, we have a couple samples here. You know, and I know you mentioned having some of that. It's absolutely stunning, you know, what they did. The stitching that they did to, you know, make these, and they would sell these as well. And although most of their consumer base was here in this area, they actually did ship things out beyond here, out through the country to the, you know, other parts of the country as well. So they had a bigger range for that as well. And then, you know, the last thing that we wanted to talk about was, you know, show some of these pictures of them, and then Aunt Barbara's going to share some of her personal life experience with these ladies. But here they are as young girls, and here they are when they were older. And here's their farm where they grew up, and this is Sunny Home Studio here, and this is a picture of them with some of their art. So we're going to pass these around, so, you know, if people want to take a look at those.
Because I donated. I'll take a look.
Yes. And Aunt Barbara, you're going to tell your personal experience.
Okay. I'm going to move some of this
Yes, I'll take this.
out of the way. Okay. I'm going to start back first with their parents. When their father was courting their mother, he made her a lap desk, and this is the lap desk that he made for her, and it had all kinds of little cubby holes and places this opens, and all these little doors open that they could keep things in. And but that was before they were married, because it's got the date up here, and they weren't married until 1980. He gave her this in 1876. I'm sorry. They were married in 1880. So then when I was little, we lived in an apartment in the building that's being passed around. They had apartments in the top of their home. And we lived there with, my parents lived there with the Beals, and they shared a bathroom, the two families. So I was born while they lived there, and they would call me their little girl. And Elsie would talk about having me over her shoulder when she signed for the other house that they bought. So I won't tell you then how old that house is. But anyway, there were a lot of different things that I can tell you about them. They were very to me, they always seemed old. And when you see the newspaper article, that's a picture of their studio that they had, and it has the date on the top. So I was very young, and they were always, to me, seemed like they were older people. But they were also very superstitious, and I've found a lot of our older relatives were superstitious. If you broke the mirror, you had 7 years bad luck. Don't let that black cat walk in front of your path. So there were a lot of them, but one of them I really remember is that on the New Year's Day, the first person to come through your door had to be a man with black hair. Well, my father had black hair. So every New Year's Day, no matter how late he was up the night before, he had to get up really early, get over to their house and go through the door before anybody else came so that they would have good luck the next year. They would come to our house for Christmas, and we would always have to wait for them, and we'd have Christmas downstairs, and Dad'd go light the fire, and he'd talk about, he'd ooh and ah about what was down there, and we couldn't see it until they came. And then when they got there, we could go down, and they always brought homemade rolls for our breakfast afterwards. So they also had everything in their house was antique. So whenever we went over there, my mother would say before we even got in the door, now do not touch anything. Be careful that you don't touch anything. So but I think most of that was for your mother, because she was known to touch everything. So also, they would give us Coke. Now, we were not allowed to have Coke very often. Maybe for Christmas you got a Coke. But whenever we went over there, they'd offer us Coke, and they'd even tell us we could have 2 glasses of Coke. And they would have cookies. They always had nice homemade cookies, but everything was always served fancy. They knew how to entertain. They had beautiful china, and they used it. Now, I have the tea set that they had. I do not use it. It sits on display because I'd be afraid something would happen to it, but they used to tell me it was from Germany. It's all hand done. It was buried during the Civil War, and that they had researched it, and there were only 3 other sets in the country that they found, and theirs was the most complete. Huh? Now, how much of that story is true, I don't really know, but that's what they would tell me about it. I'll show you a picture of what it looked like. It was called Copper Luster. So anyway, they had started their business at Sunny Homes, and they had different cameras. Now, the one over here is a box camera. I don't think they use that as much. This one back here, I forgot what it's called.
Is that the Boteler?
What is it, James? Voigtland one. And they had the wooden tripod. Now, they would go out to take pictures, and when they would go out, even when I was little, when they would go out, you took picnic lunch. You didn't stop and buy food. And so this is the table that they traveled with. The top comes off, and it rolls up, and the legs all fold up. So they would take this with them for their picnics. Underneath is...
the picnic set. It is.
Okay, they had 2 basket things they took. One is over here. When we're finished, you can come look at it. It had all the silver, it was metal, and metal, there, she'll show you. All the enamelware that they would take to use. This one under here has, it's got metal inside that you probably put ice in here, and this would have been for the cold items to keep them cold.
Good thing.
So they were always set when they went traveling. So let's see. The picture sheet told you that at first they used the French word for 3 sisters. We don't have a whole lot of them, but when you're finished, you can look up here, and some of these have, like this one says the 3 sisters, and then later they changed it to Jones sisters. You can point that around. But they did always include it, and I think it's really neat the way they got along so well as sisters, because there's a lot of sisters today could not have lived together, worked together, and been so congenial. So some of the pictures that they had, yeah, we can pass them around, they can look at them. What they did is they took their photographs, and I'm going to use the bigger one so you can see it. A lot of their photographs were farms because they grew up on a farm. So and this area of Carroll County was farming area, so there were a lot of farms. Some of these farm pictures, there's hanging in Bob Evans and McDonald's have copies of these that are hanging in there. They would take the picture in black and white, and then from there, they would paint it so that it would come to life for you.
Do you know where that one was taken?
I don't know. I don't know what farm this was taken on. I have no record. I'm sure maybe somewhere I can find out, but
Did they
I
keep
don't.
a log of where they took pictures?
Oh.
Not that we have.
We
no.
haven't gotten. I've got all the film, but I don't have it. And they do have some things written, but some of it's in code, the numbers and things. So I don't know what their coding system was. And there might be numbers on the back of some of the pictures, but we haven't been able to get that together yet. We're still working on it. And see, this was a different farm picture that they took. So these were different farm pictures that they would do. They'd take the black and white and then they would paint it for whoever wanted it. Okay, the other thing they liked to take other than farms was gardens. They loved their gardens, and they did have nice gardens. And they had this one. Now, I don't know, they wrote this on, but I'm not sure if they made this up or whether it's from somebody. You might be able to tell me. It's our fondest hopes, our fondest inspirations are born in a garden, God's garden. And they would put this on. I've seen it on quite a few things.
Mm-hmm.
Lay them over there if you want. So they love to take pictures of flowers. And they would stage them. They would take the black and white, and then they would paint them, and sometimes they could take one picture of a group of roses and then whatever color you wanted for your house, then they would just make the roses that color. So they had the option of making it how they wanted it.
Did you say one of the sisters did all the painting and one did all the
Ida.
photographing?
Basically,
I think Ida was the artist, but I thought she might have. Somebody mentioned to me once that she might have trained the other
others
sisters
to
to do
help.
some of it.
Okay.
So I'm not sure about
She
that.
wasn't the same
she's-
one who took the pictures, though?
no,
Okay.
Elsie
Okay.
took the picture. She's the
I'm gonna
youngest.
pass some of these around.
And so then they would take a picture, and they always used, in their pictures like this would have been china and things that they owned that they would use. They'd take a black and white. Then they could make it small, whatever size, and they could paint it. I hope this one. Or bigger, but if you see, they look a little different, each one of them. So they each have their own little take on it. That makes it very personal.
Did they have a dark room in their house?
Yes,
Yes.
Ida was the one who did the photo developing.
Okay.
She was also the artist, and she did the developing, even
Okay.
though Elsie was the one who
Took the pictures.
took the pictures.
Yeah, because Ida went to school and learned some of this.
Okay.
Anne actually has a picture over here that if you want to look at later is this same print, but the flowers are different colors once again.
Yeah,
in
this is a
too, yeah.
different set of china that they used. This was the black and white. Then this was the pictures, how they did it different.
Oh, that's wonderful.
You're done now?
So this particular china, this is the copper luster. This is the tea set that they had. And they used it in photographs, so you can see how they would be different. This particular set the cups have a little round saucer thing that the couple sit in, and then this little shallow bowl. And they said that they would put your tea in the cup, but then you poured it in the bowl I guess you drank it out of the bowl, I don't know.
I think so.
I think they drank it, I thought that's what she told me, that you drank it out of the bowl, that way it cooled it down, but you had the little cup with this little round saucer and then the bowl. So other than that, then they would take, I see we have a friend came along. pictures of scenery. Now this, they call it Rocks and Rills, and it could have been one of the streams and all around here.
That's down on Route
This
two.
one is Catoctin Falls, and I know that I have pictures of us when we were little there. A lot of people go visit. This is a very famous falls to visit. And this one is the Potomac River. So they must have loved water and scenery. Just take that. Then they took pictures of places. This is the famous one that a lot of people know. This is the Jug Bridge in Frederick, and it has a lot of history with the Civil War. And then this is wait a minute, let me start with. This is the Washington Monument in Baltimore, and then this is the Washington Monument in Washington with the cherry blossoms and the reflective pools. And then this Capitol reflecting in and the reflection is so great that sometimes I tend to get it upside down because it is just so neat. Now this is the Adams House, Freedom Avenue, and I remember as a child we always went to the called it the Adams Farm, and skate on their pond. Well, you all see what they're doing now there. It's right on Freedom Avenue next to the elementary school there, and they're building all those homes. And I don't know, they have a little place that they tried to put the pond. But I know there have been times when they tried to move ponds and it didn't work. They want to be where they want to be. But anyway, this is what it looked like before all those houses. So when you drive by Freedom Avenue, you can look at what it looks like now and know this is what it was. So it's nice having all this history. So I think a lot of our history is getting lost. I didn't know if you want to read the first. If you don't want to read it all, you read the first two and the last two maybe.
Okay.
All right, this is another painting they did. It's called Log Cabin Home for the Jones Sisters. And my father did poetry. And he wrote a poem about his father's log cabin home. So Annie's going to read you some of that.
Would you tell us who your father was?
My father was Jack Ruby. It was Irving Ruby, and if you go past Freedom Elementary School, it says Irving Ruby Road. That was my grandfather. The road was named after, and we lived in the first house there. And he was also the head of the hospital, head of the lab at Springfield Hospital. So a lot of people knew him from Springfield.
Now this log cabin, is that the one that used to be located where London Bridge, what do you
I'm
call it?
not sure.
I think
Do you
it's-
recognize this, Aunt Virginia?
Was that?
I'll have to pass it back to her.
Yeah, I-
She might know.
I think there was one. Those of us that are a little older where the drive-in movie was.
Yeah, there was one
and
there.
That's where
Oh,
your
okay,
father
okay.
said he was born.
Right.
That's
so
what I
that,
thought
and
that
I think
was.
that
Okay,
one
that's what
might
I
be
think
that. That's
That
the
is
one I
gone.
think.
I didn't know who that one belonged to, the one that was there in that deep area where the
That
London
would have
town,
been
or whatever it was called.
Do you remember it at all, Aunt Virginia?
No, I'm not
Okay.
talking about that.
all right. So he wrote poetry, and this is what he had written about his log cabin home.
So he said, Log cabin home. I took a trip to dreamland. My brothers went with me across the vacant farmland, our birthplace for to see. A few old posts, some rusty wire where cattle used to roam, part of an old log cabin, which once we called our home. We rambled on, then started home in old familiar sights. From my mind began to fade like days into nights, relegated once again to dreams I oft will find, on many days and many ways recalled again to mind. That was his poem written about his memory of his log cabin where he was born.
So then they also like to take pictures of buildings. So they took pictures of churches. This is Bethany M&E Church in Howard County. This is St. Paul's. Did I have one on the back of that?
No.
Not
This
the
is-
St. Paul's here.
Yes.
Yes, it looks like the St. Paul's here to me. There is another St. Paul's in, I think
You're
it's
talking
in
about in
Howardtown.
Yes,
Yeah.
Rachel.
Is this the one down?
Doesn't look
Sykesville?
like it to me.
Doesn't look like it? Okay, there
Yes,
are
because
two
it's
St.
right
Paul's.
at
I think the other was in Howardtown maybe? And then this is the Springfield Church.
Yep.
Oh, the other one, I think the entrance to St. Paul's used to be on the back side, so
Yes.
maybe that's the
It
back.
could be
Yeah, it
from a
could be
different
off of
angle.
Norwood Avenue.
That's
Okay.
where Main Street was, started out.
That's right, Main
Yeah,
Street was
so
And it
on
was
that
right
side.
beside the jail.
So maybe.
So maybe that
Pass
is-
it
maybe
around,
that's
you can
the-
look at it closer
Okay.
and see,
I'm used to
you know.
seeing the other side though.
Yeah,
Yes,
of course.
because I think that
And
was
I
All
got
right,
that
and
one.
this is St. Barnabas,
Yes.
and then this is the interior
Yes.
St.
Yeah,
Barnabas.
I think that's right. That's what it is.
The back,
I think.
the other entrance.
Yeah, it's not the way we're used to looking
Yeah,
at it.
yeah.
Main Street.
Back there, it would have been a little different.
Oh, this one, yeah. And
You
you
have
have a good picture.
We need to do altar. You know what? I think the gatehouse has these. I think Father Bremen donated them here.
So what they did is they took a lot of their pictures, the historical ones, and they went through and they made a book called Maryland History Through the Camera's Eye. And they would have like Carroll County, Talbot County, the different counties and a building from there, and then they would put what it is. This is, I copied 2 of the pages. This would have been Ellicott City and the story about Ellicott City. So you can pass that
It's
around.
50 pages. The
How did you
original
have
book.
that?
I think they sold it, right?
They
Yeah,
sold
I
it,
have
yes.
one, and there's one in the collection
There's
here.
about 5 here.
Yeah.
So we don't have really good ones. I didn't bring it because all the pages are. It's
Oh,
just
I've
pages
got a
stuck in.
good one.
Yeah, we may have to look at yours.
Yeah, sure.
So then they also made little note cards, and these are 4 little note cards that are stuck in here, and they would put paintings on them, and then you could write your little notes and send to people. So these would be note cards. Now she showed you the cut work. This is a picture of the cut work that they did for the tablecloth. Now I remember going over as a child and them showing me and trying to teach me how to do cut work. And now I regret that I didn't take the time to really try it and really concentrate on what it was doing. I thought it was interesting. It was very interesting to see, and I liked watching them do it. But I just didn't learn it, and I should have. It was it's a skill. But this is a lot of cut work on here. This would have been how they would have set a table if they were having somebody over. It's all antiques, the whole thing on here. This teapot is a clay pot that they would cover with silver. And I think that maybe that, and the bowl was the same way. It's clay covered in silver. And on Falls Road, they had a factory that made clay things. I can't remember what it was called, but I think these might have been made there. And this is a piece of the cut work you can look at as you pass it around. I know that they would show me they do all the work on top of the fabric first. So all these little sections that, like this would have been the fabric across here. They do it across, and this just hangs loose across the top. Then when you're finished, you go back and you cut out all the parts underneath, which is a very tedious job that you don't make a mistake and cut some of your sewing that you did. So you can pass these around and look at them. So I think that's basically what we have. If there's anything else.
Well, and I also wanted to add, as I look at the information that we have from them, I wish so much that I had spoken to people who knew them, who are now not here. So, I feel like some of the history of who they were is being lost. Yeah. So if there's anyone here who knew them or has stories or histories of them that we didn't present, because this is pretty much all we have, I'd love to grab your phone number if I can and maybe sit down with you and just hear your stories so that I can record them, to go with the pictures and what we have, for future generations. I think of my little girls, someday, they'll look at these beautiful pictures, but they've never met the Jones sisters either. So, any stories